Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mag-M Coloring Book tutorials. We're going to be going over the techniques to use to create specific effects using pencil crayons. What you'll need is a good set of pencil crayons, I suggest 24 or more to give you the best variety, as well as a handy-dandy pencil sharpener. Gotta keep those pencils sharp. Today we're going to be going over the jewel mandala, where we'll be going over how to create jewel effects. First thing you need to do is figure out which colors you want to do. I'm going to be choosing a selection of yellow, purple, and blue colors from the different spectrums in order to create my effects, including a dark tone, a mid-tone, and a light tone of each color. I'll also make sure that I have my handy dandy white, and also, if not a black, a dark sepia. I prefer sepia as it gives me the better effects. The first thing you're going to do is actually separate the mandala into 3 different sections, basically determining which colors you're wanting in which section. For me, I'm going to do the exterior, the smaller details in this yellow, and I'm going to be doing the jewels in a combination of the purple and blue. I'm going to figure it out a little bit as I go to see as to where I want each color to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my lightest shade of yellow and cover my entire yellow section in a light coloring. I'm not going to press down on my pencil. I just want to make sure that the color is applied there. That way, if I find that I don't want to color in specific areas, I can still erase it. At this point, when you do a light shade of a color, you still have time to erase it. Yes, pencil crayons can in fact be erased, so long as they are still not pressed into the paper. As you build the colors, we're going to be pressing harder and harder onto our pencils to get that nice solid color in there. But for now, it's just a nice light shading. So I'm applying first the yellow, then I'm going to apply where I want my purple, and then my blue as the final end. Once I've got all my base colors in and I'm happy with where all the colors are being organized, I'm going to go over where I want my highlighted areas to be with my white. Now you're not going to see the white properly, but it is going to help to make sure that that area does stay light as we do the coloring process. For the jewels specifically, where at the edge of each crack, I want to make sure that there is some white, some lighter areas in order to create those highlights that we're going to need at the very end of the effect. So I'm going to go over with my white and just make sure that all the whites, all the edges have this small speck. It can be randomized. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just to give you a good idea. To help you, try and figure out where the light is coming from. For this specific drawing, I'm making the light come from the center of the jewel, which means that every crack, at the edge of every crack, there is going to be a highlight. However, on the exterior edges, because the jewel will be sitting against another surface, it does not require a highlight. Once my highlights have been put in, now I get to build up the color and get that nice solid tone, which means I'm going to be using my darker colors first just to determine where my shade is coming from. With a jewel, especially when there's a sharp edge, there's always one side that's a little bit darker than the rest. Then I'm going to use my mid-tone pencil to basically determine where my mid-tones are, making sure that I don't cover the entire jewel. Finally, what you're going to do is you're going to use your lightest color actually as a blender, which is why the white was very important to put in. It allows for a specific section of the jewel to really stick out and be the lighter shade. As you can see, I'm always alternating between all my colors, and you can always add it back up and keep building onto the color until you get the effect that you want particularly. I usually have a reference picture that I have next to me, which is outside of the scene right now, just to help me determine as to where I should put my darks and where I should put my lights. Even the most experienced artist sometimes has to use reference pictures in order to get that look that they're looking for. For these specific jewels, I just want to make sure that they have the highest contrast, and then when I finally put my final highlights, that they're going to pop off the image. The reason why we use the lightest tone as a blender as it was used for our base. Also, If you blend with your mid or dark tones, you're going to lose that entire light tone. It's just going to cover it in one dark color. If you're wanting to add additional highlights at the very end just to increase that contrast, I use my dark sepia, or you can use your black very lightly on the edges where I want that darkness to come out and pop through. I always work one color at a time, as often the color schemes that you're going to use, that one specific color is always going to be representing one kind of object, which means you're going to be using the same technique to color over and over again the same way. That way I can systematically go through my image and ensure that all my colors are consistent. This consistency is really important when you're trying to make especially jewel tones. In the larger jewels where I color, I actually go from the center of the object, meaning I go from the outside edge and work to the center, leaving the lightest areas on the exterior. This is because often when a jewel gets cracked in this way, the lighter, wherever there's less resistance or where less lighting, is where there's going to be the highest amount of contrast. By this I mean where the cracks are is going to be usually the lightest area because there's been damage to the glass or the jewel. Whereas the center area, because it is still pure, is going to have the darker tones, and that is exactly the kind of look that I'm looking for. Once I've finished all my blues, I move on to my purples, where again I use a very similar method in terms of where I apply my colors. I determine my highlights with the white, then I go in with the darker colors furthest away from the where that I've put the white, because that's going to be the darker areas, and then start darkening it with my darker and mid tones, and then use my lightest color, my lightest shade of purple specifically, in order to blend everything together. Again, if you have not pressed hard on and it's just the light shading that we did originally and you're not happy where the placement of the color is, you can always erase it and cover it with another color. Always note, however, that covering up a very dark color with a very light color does get a little bit difficult, just because there's always going to be a slight tint to the paper now. I tend to leave the more complicated areas to the very end, as I like to ease into my coloring. Also, the most difficult details, the finer details, are the hardest ones to color, the most time consuming, and also the ones that you oftentimes tend to change midway through. I'm not going to change the color for this, just because I really do enjoy the stark contrast of the blue and yellow. Now, I'm going to go in with my darkest tones first. It's going to be a little bit more complicated for this shading, as I want an overlapping look to it. Also, to me, this is gold filigree, so I want it to look as much like gold as possible, and gold is never 100% perfect. So I'm going to go over it pretty carefully, making sure that I imagine the 3D imaging of this specific filigree. But again, much like the jewels, I still approach it in a very similar way, adding my highlights first, then my darkest tones, and then adding my mid-tones before blending in with my lightest color, in order to make sure that I have the greatest range and greatest transition between the three tones of color. Once I've done all that, I always go back over certain colors, refine some of my edges, look where things kind of get blurred out. A good way to figure out where you're missing something is sometimes just to squint your eyes so that all the colors blend in. The areas that disappear the most are the areas that you want to pay attention a little bit more. So those are usually the places where I'm going to add my dark sepia in order to really define those edges, so that even when I'm squinting, I can still see a little bit of definition. The final step is the magic portion. It's my favorite part. I'm going to use a gel pen. You can also use a white paint marker. Paint marker is a little bit more effective than a gel pen, especially on pencil crayon, but I still do like using the gel pens because I can blend it a little bit better. But I'm going to go over my edges where I want my highlights to be, and I'm going to add this stark white contrast. Anything that shines or has a shimmer to it always has that nice pure white spot. The advantage of the gel pen is it's never 100% white throughout the entire marking. Therefore, it looks like it blends in with the actual coloring a little bit easier. Now that I've added every single one of my highlights, this jewel mandala is completed. And I'm pretty happy with it. I hope you all learned a lot, as I had a lot of fun teaching you how I do my specific jewel type mandala. There are a lot of techniques on there, but this is the way that I particularly like to do it. Please share your finished drawings. I'd like to see what they look like, and share them with the hashtag MagMColoring2022. And thanks for watching, and hope to see you again.